Senate Bill 631, the clerk will read.
Senate Bill 631, Fairness in Women's Sports Act.
Senator Corbin is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I appreciate all the lively debate during the process, and we certainly appreciate all the comments made and those that spoke. I just want to say something up front to all of you from my heart. This bill has nothing to do with other bills that are running that maybe have some similar content, and there's bills all over the United States. Somebody referred to the hundreds of bills. This bill has nothing to do with any of those. This bill is a bill by itself. It's about women's sports. It's about fairness in women's sports. It has nothing to do with the other bills that deal with sexual preference or sexual identity and all the issues to do with that. This bill has nothing to do with that. This is about keeping biological males from playing women's sports. That's it. Simple bill. This is a common sense legislation. Like so many parents whose kids are student athletes, we want to make sure that fair competition is maintained. We would never, none of us in this room, none of us would pit a JV team against a varsity team. We wouldn't do that. We do not have men's teams play women's teams. Ask yourself why. Why do we not have men's teams play women's teams? We do not. It'd be unfair to our students if we ignored some of the biological realities that have measurable impacts on outcomes of sports. And let me quote, and she's not here, but she spoke during the committee process. Sylvia Hatchell is former UNC women's basketball coach. I believe she coached there over 30 years. She said, first of all, and I would agree with her, she said, first of all, I support trans athletes and their right to gender identity as they see fit. However, competitive sport is one of the few places in our society where sex differences matter. And with that, Mr. President, I would like to defer to my other sponsors on the bill.
Senator Kravick, for what purpose you rise?
Speak to the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this bill is designed pure and simply to protect women's sports. As my colleague said, it's common sense legislation. Think back during the pandemic, we were all asked to use our common sense, wear masks, wash our hands thoroughly, be careful in crowds. We were also told to follow the science. Now we're being told to ignore our common sense and ignore the science. One does not have to be a biologist to know what a woman is. I heard a nominee to the Supreme Court refuse to answer that question because she said she was not a biologist, so she couldn't answer. Well, most of us do know the difference, even though we're not biologists. Title IX is federal legislation that was signed into law by President Nixon in 1972. The purpose was to protect women's sports, to give women the opportunity to succeed in sports. They could win scholarships. They could become famous athletes. That's what Title IX was all about, to level the playing field so that women could have the same opportunity to compete as the men had. In most cases, girls and women are not physically capable to compete against men. And I will say a transgender woman is a biological male. That's the science. In most cases, males have larger frames. They have bigger hearts. They have more muscle mass. They are just stronger. They're physically more able. Many of you may have heard the story of Leah Thomas. She was a swimmer from UPenn. She swam for 3 years on the male team. She also was ranked, competing against males, she was ranked 554th in the 200-meter freestyle. Yet when she swam against the women, she crushed them. She beat them by laps in the pool. And Riley Gaines, an Olympic swimmer, testified. It spoke, I've seen her on TV a lot, and then she spoke yesterday in one of our committees. And she competed against Leah Thomas. She also shared the story of being an athlete in high school and in college and swimming 6 hours every day, 3 hours in the morning before going to school and 3 hours in the afternoon when she came home. She competed against Leah Thomas and they tied. She shared the story in committee. The trophy was given to Leah Thomas because they needed photo ops. That was not fair to Riley Gaines, who had practiced and competed her whole life. That was terribly unfair. Imagine being the young women on a team and knowing no matter how much you practice, no matter how hard you work at your craft, you're not going to be able to stand on the podium and hold that trophy. That is just wrong. It is wrong. Female athletes must be protected. They must have a level playing field in order to compete. Title IX was the equalizer for females in sports. It has no other purpose other than to give women the opportunity to compete. Our bill addresses that issue. We want to protect women's sports. We want our women and our girls to be able to compete against each other, and may the best girl or woman win. Mr. President, I ask that you recognize Senator Sawyer.
Senator Sawyer, for what purpose you rise?
To speak to the bill, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, just to let you know, I'm standing here to bat cleanup on this and stand for any questions that my colleagues may have.
Senator Corbin, your light is on. Did you want to speak again? Okay. Discussion or debate? Senator Murdoch, for what purpose you rise?
To speak on the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Everyone wants their kids to grow and learn in safe environments, but this bill does nothing to make our schools safer or help our students to succeed. Unfortunately, here we go again, waging culture wars with targets on the backs of children. This is an intentional distraction, and it does not solve the real challenges or problems that families are facing in North Carolina each and every day. We have pressing education matters like teacher shortages, aging schools, learning loss, student homelessness, students working to learn in the midst of experiencing trauma at home, and most importantly, an obscene amount of tragic school shootings that we need to focus our time and attention on. Instead, we are focusing on culture wars, which are political attempts to divide us. This bill makes all girls who want to play in sports less safe by potentially allowing for invasive checks and inappropriate questions to determine who is eligible for which sports and teams. I want to remind folks, this came up in Education Committee, that this legislation seeks to call out 2 student athletes in North Carolina. Currently, it would only apply to 2 student athletes in the state of North Carolina. Even Republican governors in other states have vetoed similar bills. School personnel have worked really hard, statewide and nationally, to create policies that will review instances on a case-by-case basis. We have those policies in place at schools across the state. Opposed to proposing legislation, we need to utilize these policies, and it is for that reason that I'm sending forth an amendment.
Send forward your amendment. The clerk will read.
Senator Murdoch moves to amend the bill.
Senator Murdoch is recognized to explain Amendment 1.
This amendment will do the following. It will ban this personal and invasive inspection of students in order to verify their sex. It will prohibit anyone who has been convicted of a sexual crime from participation in sports covered by this bill. It will ban conversion therapy and make conversion therapy illegal. It will prohibit anyone convicted of a sex crime from being a middle school or high school coach, even if that record has been expunged. And it will also create a mental health grant program.
Senator Murdoch, you're still standing. Are you still intending to speak?
I was waiting on action for the amendment. Oh, yes. Or if folks want to speak on the amendment, you let me know. That's the end of the amendment.
Further discussion and debate on Amendment 1. Senator Heiss, for what purpose you rise?
I move that Amendment 1 do lie upon the table.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 1 do lie upon the table. It is a non-debatable motion. We will go immediately to vote. Question for the Senate is the motion to table Amendment 1. All in favor of the motion will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk, record the vote. Having voted in the affirmative, 17 in the negative. The motion to table Amendment 1 does pass. Amendment 1 is tabled, and Senate Bill 631 is back before us. Discussion or debate on
Mr. President, I
Senate Bill
need to change my vote
631.
from yes to no.
Senator Chaudhry changes his vote from aye to no on the amendment. (29-18). The amendment is tabled. Bill is back before us. Discussion or debate on Senate Bill 631. Senator Murdoch, your light is on. Did you intend to speak again?
Yes, Mr. President,
You
just a
have the
few
floor
more
to speak a
comments.
second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is, in fact, an inclusion playbook that guides rulemakers and policymakers on this topic. I've printed out the cover of it for reference this morning. Attorneys, school personnel, parents, and trans athletes were consulted in generating this inclusion playbook. I talked with one of those attorneys this morning. She is a North Carolina native and a proud graduate of North Carolina Central School of Law. I will share some of their do's and don'ts. Do reach out to transgender athletes and organizations who work at the intersection of transgender inclusion and athletics for information and resources to guide you in your policymaking. Do consider the level of regulation in your policy in light of the level of sport and age of athletes who would be impacted by that policy. Do not directly or indirectly ban transgender athletes from participating in sports and competing as full members of the team. Do not require athletes to prove their gender based on stereotypical notions of masculinity and femininity through invasive testing. I'll close with, this is not a new topic. While more trans people are now sharing their identities more publicly, they are not new to sports. I'm a better person today as a result of playing sports in school. No student should be denied the opportunity to learn the values of teamwork and leadership by being banned from playing sports. I encourage my colleagues to vote down this harmful bill.
Further discussion or debate. Senator Chaudhry, for what purpose you rise?
To offer an amendment, Mr. President.
Send forward your amendment. Clerk will read.
Senator Chaudhry moves to amend the bill.
Senator Chaudhry is recognized to explain Amendment 2.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rise to offer this amendment, or I guess to use Senator Sawyer's comparison, try to throw a couple of strikes this afternoon. This amendment does a couple of things to address a couple of issues that has arisen during our committee debate this week. First, I think it's safe to say that we're not going to come to an agreement this afternoon on the lively debate about transgender athletes' participation in women's sports. But I actually want to focus on the implication of this legislation and how it will affect our children. And let me say before I discuss the amendment, we've heard a lot from other members about their high school athletic careers and their children's sporting achievements. I will share with you all that I played high school tennis. I played a year of freshman football. I did not start. You might be surprised to learn that, with a bunch of guys that would end up going to the 4A high school championship where we lost to Greensboro Page, Senator Garrett, and my daughter plays soccer. Here's what the bill would do, the bill that we are debating would essentially do. I want you to imagine that your 13-year-old daughter wants to play soccer, but before you sign her up, she has to sit down for an interview with some strangers who ask her questions about her menstrual cycle, her body changes, and potentially have to undergo a general inspection. And I would never let that happen to my child, and I don't think you would want that to happen to your child. And so I think when we're talking about the implications of a bill, we need to talk about common sense. I think it's abundantly clear from the robust and lively debate that we've had in committees this issue that this issue is very complicated. All situations are different, and one-size-fits-all rule does not work for girls, for female athletes, and isn't necessarily the right approach. The first part of this amendment puts trust in parents and the High School Athletic Association in consultation with medical professionals to make those decisions, not politicians here in Raleigh. The process involves submission of a gender identity request form, verification from healthcare professionals, and other documentation. This process has worked. The High School Athletic Association hasn't provided blanket approval for transgender female athletes. In fact, it's rejected an applicant. Second, during our debate, there was debate about the economic impact of passing such a bill. Senator Perry cited some polling yesterday. I want to make reference to a 2023 CEO guide to Site Selection magazine. I know it's a magazine that we all like to refer, that asked chief executives the following question, and that question is, what is most important to you when looking for relocating your operation in the United States? So not surprisingly, the number one answer to this response was skill and availability of workforce. Second was infrastructure and transportation access. And the third-ranked response in this survey that just came out this year is political consideration and controversy. So, as I mentioned, this bill returns us back to political consideration and controversy. This bill returns us back to the culture wars of House Bill 2, and we don't need to return back to a time where businesses elected not to expand jobs in arenas lost sporting events. This amendment reflects lessons learned from House Bill 2. It simply states that this legislation will expire if a company that's received economic development incentives reduces or halts the creation of additional jobs due to a public statement opposing the act. In short, Mr. President, this amendment puts trust in our High School Athletic Association in consultation with medical professionals to make a case-by-case assessment about transgender athletes, and second, and make sure that we're not halting our job creation momentum, that we are not putting the fact that we are the #1 state in the country to do business at risk. I urge you to support this amendment.
Discussion or debate on Amendment 2. Senator Heiss, for what purpose you rise?
I move that Amendment 2 do lie upon the table.
Second.
Moved and seconded that Amendment 2 do lie upon the table. It's a non-debatable motion. We'll go immediately to vote. The question for the Senate is the motion.
Mr. President,
Senator Chaudhry, for what purpose you rise?
I'd like to make some closing comments, Mr. President.
No debate. Motion has been made and seconded on the motion to table Amendment 2. It is a non-debatable motion.
I'd like to speak on the bill after the debate on the amendment.
Senator Chaudhry, we're going to go to the motion to table Amendment 2.
Oh, we have, excuse me, my apologies, Mr. President.
Question for the Senate is the motion to table Amendment 2. All in favor of the motion will vote aye. All opposed vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the vote, and clerk will record the vote.
We hadn't voted yet.
(29) having voted in the affirmative, 18 in the negative. The motion to table Amendment 2 does pass, and Amendment 2 is tabled, and the bill is back before us. Senator Chaudhry, for what purpose you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for the mistake there. Mr. President, I rise to speak on the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to make 3 points on this bill before we vote on it today. First, as Senator Murdoch said, we're debating a bill that focuses on the wrong issues instead of prioritizing the right issues in public education. We've elected to engage in culture wars that divide us instead of focusing on issues like teacher shortages, teacher pay, crumbling schools, learning loss, mental health challenges, and school shootings. We are focused on the wrong priorities. Second, Second, as mentioned, we have a process already that's working. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a process that requires athletes to go through an extensive process in consultation with medical professionals. As mentioned, the process reviews each application on a case-by-case basis. We need to trust our high school athletic association in consultation with our medical professionals to make these decisions and not politicians in Raleigh. And finally, as I mentioned, I remain concerned about what this bill does to our economic momentum over the last 4 years. I believe it's safe to say that we've recruited companies and created thousands of jobs because we've actually avoided political controversy. This bill puts us on the path where we risk our #1 ranking as a state to do business in America. As I mentioned, don't take my word for it. Take the response of surveys of CEOs across the country in the 2023 Site Selection magazine that I referred to. I'm going to close again by quoting Governor Spencer Cox of Utah that I had shared with during the Education Committee discussion earlier this week, who vetoed similar legislation in the state. As I mentioned, he is a Republican governor. He, along with the Republican governor of Indiana, has vetoed similar legislation. And Governor Cox said, "I must admit I am not an expert on transgenderism. I struggle to understand so much of it. When in doubt, however, I always try to err on the side of kindness, mercy, and compassion." And so, Mr. President, we're debating the wrong issues this afternoon. We have a reasonable and tested athletic policy. We know this bill will do economic damage to our state. And Mr. President, I believe that we are not exhibiting kindness, mercy, and compassion with this bill. I ask each and every one of my colleagues to heed the words of Governor Cox and vote down this bill.
Further discussion or debate? Senator Sawyer, for what purpose you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. To speak on the bill.
You have the floor.
Kindness and mercy. Is it kindness when a young woman such as myself used to wake up at 5:30 in the morning, bum a ride to get to Wake Forest University so she could go play tennis, work all day very hard, go out, play that championship game, study all night long, and then wake up to do it again over and over and over again? To work twice as hard, twice as long, then to have a championship ripped away from her because someone feels like they're a woman, a biological male wakes up and feels like they will go through what I go through as a woman? That is not kindness. That's the opposite. I am a woman. As a woman who played sports her entire life, as a woman who coaches young women, it's very easy to determine our womanhood. It's called a sports physical, and we do it every year, and we've done it ever since I was a little girl, and we do it today. So this idea of surprise panty checks that these people are going around and saying that we're going to do is not happening. It is a professional doctor or PA that you send your child to, just like you do today. If this bill should pass, there's no difference. So this scare tactic that you hear from these fearmongers is absolutely wrong. Today, I'm standing up for women, for girls, for your daughters, and for your granddaughters. I ask for your vote and support on this. Help me protect women with your vote today. Thank you.
Further discussion or debate? Senator Perry, for what purpose you rise?
Speak on the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would agree with some things that have been said in here today. I believe we are debating the wrong issues, but for different reasons. I'm a father of 3 daughters. I've coached 17 seasons of youth league soccer in our state. I don't hate anybody. This legislation does not prevent people from taking part in athletics and learning all the great life lessons that we've all learned from sports. It provides everyone an opportunity to play. I do want to push back on this notion, this idea that this is really controversial and bad for our state. I know there's a lot of smart people in this chamber who understand polling data. They understand statistical significance of that data. And in June of last year, the Pew Research Center released a poll indicating that nationwide, only 17% of individuals disagree with this stance because they think it is reasonable that we have women play sports against women. Look back at the history of our Olympics in our country. We have men's sports and women's sports in Olympics. Only in two areas that I can think of today do they really compete against each other. I think equestrian, where they're all riding a horse who's doing the work, and maybe in shooting. But we've had them divided to have fair competition. We have our athletic programs in our state divided by classification, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A. They're looking to expand that, but that's to keep competition fair. There are attempts to make this into something it's not for many people. For me, it is something that I see as very reasonable. I want to preserve the integrity of women's sports. I want my daughters to be protected when they play. I saw a poll yesterday that came out indicating that 71% of North Carolinians feel this way. We see that poll indicating nationwide that only 17% disagree. Those are in the same wheelhouse. So I do actually think it's reasonable. I understand some of my colleagues get national pressure from those with extreme views on this issue. And I feel bad for you. But I don't feel bad about supporting what I believe to be common sense legislation that has nothing to do with hate for me. And I reject that notion. It is about love of my children and doing what I think is right. And regarding any other institution that has rules set up or guidelines that they want to use, hey, that's fine. That's great. But we make law in this chamber. That is our lane and is our purview if we wish to make a law regarding this topic, that we do so. That's even been released in the most recent guidance from the Biden administration, that there are times in competitive sports that this is very appropriate at certain levels. Even they agree with that. This is common sense legislation. I'm sorry some are forced to take a different view, but the polling data is very clear on what the people of our country and our state feel about this issue, and I support the bill.
Discussion or debate? Senator Galey, for what purpose you rise?
To ask Senator Chaudhary a question.
Senator Chaudhary, do you yield?
Yes.
He yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I was looking at the Washington Post, and there was an article February 17th, 2023. The title of it was Crisis in American Girlhood, and it cited a statistic from federal research that 14% of our teen girls have been forced to have sex. I have absolutely no doubt that Senator Chaudhary has compassion for girls as a dad, and I have no doubt about that your intentions are good and that you're sincere. My question is, if there's a young lady on a swim team who has been raped, and there is a biological male on her swim team who's sharing the locker room space with her, and they're changing swimsuits at the same time, and he's an intact biological male, and being next to him makes her uncomfortable. It makes her revisit the events that, when she was sexually assaulted. What would you say to that young woman? How do we reconcile the fact that teen girls may experience legitimate, severe discomfort with being in the presence of a biological male? How do we reconcile that with that biological male's assertion of a right to be on that team?
Senator Chaudhary, you have the floor to respond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm not going to respond to a hypothetical because I think the fact pattern that Senator Galey has presented to us in many ways are not addressed in the legislation that we're debating. What I have simply said, and I think this goes to what Senator Perry talked about, is that we already have a policy in place in which there have been instances, Senator Gailey, in which they have said they would not permit an athlete to participate. And so I think where the debate is falling here is between an absolute ban versus looking at the issue from a case-by-case basis. The second thing I want to say is I by no means suggested that anybody hated another group of people. What I said in quoting Governor Cox was for us to exhibit that kindness and compassion the importance of exhibiting kindness and compassion in how we look at this issue. And I would argue to you, and yes, Senator Perry, the Biden administration is looking at that, is that we already have a set of rules in place that is assessing these issues on a case-by-case basis, that it's neither an absolute ban nor is it absolutely permitting every transgender athlete to participate, but that we have a set of policies that employ science, that uses medical professionals and allows experts to make the decisions as opposed to those of us here in the General Assembly.
Further discussion or debate? Senator Corbin, for what purpose you rise?
To debate the bill.
You have the floor.
Just a couple of comments that I started out with. I also reject the notion that this bill has anything to do with hate of anybody. I can tell you in my heart, and the three primary sponsors of this bill that I know very well, and we worked many hours on wording of this, hating someone else never came up. Hating or despising someone with a different sexual orientation or anything else never came up in those discussions. We only discussed the fact that biological males playing female sports is not a good thing. And that's not against anybody. And just want to make that clear. In passing this bill, we want to just make sure that biological males are not playing sports with females. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none. Question. Whoops. Senator Newton, for what purpose you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just didn't want to leave unaddressed.
What purpose do you rise?
I'm sorry, to speak on the bill. Thank you.
You have the floor.
Sorry. I just didn't want to leave unaddressed this notion, this vague threat that this is the same as HB2 and the business community is going to somehow retaliate against North Carolina. I just do not believe that is true. Number one, this is not HB2, and number two, this is common sense. And there will no doubt be pressure from Human Rights Campaign and other well-organized minority positioned groups, radical groups, on chambers of commerce, on business entities at the national level, in the boardrooms, to somehow retaliate against North Carolina. This time, I do not believe that's going to happen. And I'm going to ask our business community to strengthen its back and understand even one simple notion about this bill. Take everything that's been said here, but also if you come to North Carolina and you have daughters, we're guaranteeing that they are treated fairly. You don't have to worry about a transgender male, a biological male competing against and hurting their daughter. We heard testimony from a young lady that has been significantly injured by a biological male in a volleyball match. She spoke in committee. So this is a hard issue. We get it. But we honestly care about everyone. But we are going to protect women in this state. And so I suggest to you that Michael Jordan had it right years ago. Republicans buy Nikes too. And if you look at Anheuser-Busch, you look at Disney, I think the business community is waking up to the notion that they need to serve their shareholders and complete their fiduciary duties to their shareholders and stay out of the politics of social issues. So again, Michael had it right. Republicans buy Nikes too, and I will tell you, I promise you, whatever business you're in, you've got customers on both sides of this issue, and we implore you to understand the reasonableness of the position that we're trying to take here. Thank you.
Further discussion or debate? Hearing none, the question for the Senate is the passage on second reading of Senate Bill 631. All in favor will vote aye, all opposed will vote no. 5 seconds be allowed for the voting. Clerk, record the vote. 29, having voted in the affirmative, 18 in the negative. Senate Bill 631 has passed its second reading and will, without objection, be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Discussion or debate on third reading? Hearing none, question for the Senate is a passage on third reading of Senate Bill 631. All in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 631 has passed its third reading and will be sent to the House.